What is up, my Atomic AutoWorks friends? Today, we're going to talk about welt. And you'll have to forgive me because Anthony's playing with new tools and toys filming these videos, so I'm looking at a really bright light all the time. But today we're going to talk about welt, which is, to me, a very underrated, overseen thing in the upholstery world. Nobody really talks about it, but it's super important because we use it all the time. And there's a couple different styles. We're going to talk more about automotive, motorcycle, and marine versus home. And when you're doing like home furniture and like soft trim stuff like that, you're going to use instead of a welt cord that's plastic or hard foam, you actually use like a cloth or material. Sometimes it's kind of like almost like a batting style where it's really soft and puffy, because when you're sitting on your couch, you kind of want it cushy. Cars, you don't want that. So we make all of our own welt. So we buy the welt cord here. This is 4/32 size, is one of the most common ones that we use. And what we do is we cut our strips out, and then we're going to go over and sew them up. And when you sew them up, you have basically, you just put your welt cord in the middle, you fold it over and you sew it, and you have this nice welting. I say welting, a lot of people assume this is piping. We will be doing some videos on piping, but this is not piping, this is welting. Piping is always misconstrued as welting or welt cord. So here is the stuff we use, and you could buy this, like for the marine world, you could usually buy a matching pre-done welt, which is really nice, because if you look, as you bend it, go around corners, is already cut. So every time you go around a corner, it's already cut. And this is great. Like this here is a Sequest or Seabrook. It's a knockoff of the Sequest. So you could actually purchase this to match the material, which is really nice. So if you're doing black, red, blue, you could buy this pre-done and do it. We have just gotten into the habit of always making our own because we do so many custom colors, and it's just easier. And I'm really particular about making sure that our welt matches the same material as the actual material. So if you order a kit, so this kit here is for an older Impala, which is kind of funny because it's falling apart. So when you buy this from some of the suppliers, like you might buy a pre-done interior kit and they'll give you welt cord. So they'll give you, and the same thing we do here, we make it from scratch, but you can see they didn't stitch it, so it's just naturally falling apart. But this is nice. It's a better grade. This is exactly matches the material in the kit that you buy. If it wasn't so old and sitting here and the glue didn't release, it goes together fairly easy. I like to make sure there's a stitch there to make sure that there's no, it doesn't release and fall apart like this. But this is one that's been done, obviously, from the factory. So we're gonna go through and we'll show you how to do it, some tips and tricks. We'll show you the pressure feet that we use and how they're set up. So we'll go over to the machine and do that. All right, so as you can see, there's many different feet you could use for your sewing machine. Some get you certain things and keep you away and all that stuff, but today, the welt foot. And you could get these in different sizes, and if you see here, it's actually curved, and that is so your welt cord actually falls right into that. And the actual other side, which is on the machine, you can see this one doesn't have it, so when this comes down, it's perfectly smooth. The one on the machine actually is curved to go with that, just so that this fits on there. All right, so most commonly when you're doing a welt and you're making it yourself, there's a couple options you could do. Some people will choose to take this, fold it over, and stitch it, which I'll show you, and I'll show you why some people do it and don't. What's nice about this is when you go to sew it on, it's already done. You don't have to fight with it. You're not trying to fold this over. Some people will sew this like this, put this on, sew this around, and sew the next piece to it. Other people will actually take this from scratch, sew this on with the other panel, and do it all at the same time. It's a lot more complicated to do it that way. When we're teaching people and we're learning, we'll have people do it this way. One of the pros and cons are if you sew it, right, and you're really close to the edge, and then you sew it here and it's at all loose, when you pull it around the corner, you'll be able to see the thread behind it. And you really don't want that. You want to make sure it's nice and tight and crisp. So what we're going to do for this one is we're going to sew it on one time around here, and then put the next panel onto it and pull it tight and show you what it looks like. Also, when you're doing welt, this one here has sew foam on it. If you have an option of sewing two panels together, one with sew foam and one without, you almost always put your welt on the panel without the sew foam. The materials have a tendency to stretch and give a lot more when there's no sew foam on there. And if you were to put the welt on here and then grab the other material, it might stretch or pull too much, and then you'll have puckers and tight spots and loose spots. So let's go through here and we're gonna show you. When it's pre-sewn like this, it's very easy. You just follow it. Now when it's not, you gotta kind of pay attention. So we're gonna stick this in here, fold this over. We wanna keep our material on the edge. And we wanna make sure that our welt foot is walking right on the sewing machine, right on the welt cord rather, sorry. You follow that right around. And this takes a little bit longer. When you're doing this, you'll see me do this a lot. I like to pull it just to make sure the material is loose and relaxed. You don't want to pull it or push it, either pieces. You want to kind of leave this relaxed. If you ever see a panel that's really wobbly, that's because the person is either tugging the welt or tugging the material underneath it. And it's very common. We repair a lot of seats where people do that. So now another pro, if we had pre-sewn this, when we come around this corner here, you're going to see I'm going to not trim it and then I'm going to trim it. You can see as we come around here, the material starts to roll up and get a little funky. So usually on the pre-done welt cord, you'll see little cuts in here like this. And that's to let it just kind of go around the corner and do its own thing. So if this was already sewn, it's a lot easier than having to stop and do that. And it should lay fairly flat because we put some grooves in it. Also, when you make your pre-make your welt cord, what you want to make sure is you measure your salvage with your welt on there so that it's actually lined up well. This is kind of a good way to learn how to do it. It's kind of a fun way. You don't really mess up that much, and you just take your time and just put your little lines in there. And then it will roll around that corner a lot nicer. So you can see here, it's not really exaggerated as much as it normally is, but you can see as it goes around here where I cut it, it's laying kind of flat, almost rolling off that way, and where it's not cut, it's rolling up. And what happens is if you go to sew your next piece on there, you see how nice and relaxed this is? Our top panel, when it goes on, will sew really tight on here. But as we get around here, because it's all bunched up, that your stitching is going to want to end up over here. So when we fold this inside out the way it should be, you'll see those stitching. So I'm going to put some relief cuts in there. And then it relaxed. So now just looking at that, obviously we have our bump here, which is another thing. It's kind of a mystery. Some people do and some people don't. Is you could actually take your top stitch underneath here where it's really thick and just get rid of that. You just got to be careful because if you cut it too close to the stitching, when you pull it in here, sometimes your cut mark will show up. But just by taking that little piece off, you see how smooth this is now versus over here where we didn't cut it. It has a bump over here. So now we're about to sew the side panel onto the top panel. So I do something that you're not supposed to do, and I start from the center and work my way out, and I do that a lot when I'm working with other people who pattern stuff. This way I know if I have a seam like this that has to match up with that, and I start from the center, you could walk it around here, see exactly where it goes. So this one here, obviously, because we patterned the seat, and this is why I said on a non-high-end seat, a lot of times you'll make the seams specifically off center, because if you had them line up here and they're off, it looks like heck. So we'll do the same thing here. We'll come from our center point, work our way around here, and make sure that it is past the seam about the same. So I know we're centered, we're good. So now when you're doing welt, you could very easily measure your stitch distance from the edge, right? And then come in and mark it. I don't usually use a pen, but I'm using it for example so you can see it. So then you have a mark that is exactly where you need to sew it on, and you can just follow that edge. If you're sewing the back side of it, it's really easy because you already have the stitch line to follow as a guide, but you always have a blind spot. So if you were to start sewing with and trusted your alignment V's, which we could look here and see, this cushion here should have lines in it. There's a double line there that would correspond with this, and this would come around to here. Let me just see if it would match up. That line does match up. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start here, and we'll start sewing around and make sure it lines up. And if it doesn't, I'll show you how we fix it. So what's nice about doing it this way is, especially for beginners, is when you're doing thicker foam, like 1/2 inch foam or whatever, it gets really hard to do a welt and feel underneath it, and even have your foot actually cup the welt cord. So now you have the line you can go by with your stitching. So you know if you stitch right on that, or even a 1/64 of an inch towards it, you'll just have a tighter welt, but you have a guide to go by. So we could just literally go by here. I'm just going to keep checking our marks to make sure everything lines up. The same thing, we do not want to force the top or bottom layer of this. Followed all the V's, and then something along the pattern here is off. So now this is about 3/4 of an inch off. So we're going to take this off, and I'm going to do it like I normally do it. All right, so I'm going to do this the other way now to show you, to prove a point. What ended up happening is, as this was getting here, we followed all of our lines, and as we got to this, I knew that this was too close. This seam was too close to that seam, because when I started from the center, worked my way out, I could obviously see that this seam was supposed to be over here further. So now I'm going to start from the center, and we're going to work our way out, and I'll show you a couple different tricks. So I'll show you the hard way to sew blind. When you're putting welt on blind, and when we're doing it with the stitch like we just had. So since we're starting from this side, we're going to put our center here, and we're basically blind. I know the welt's here, I can feel it with my hand, so what I'll do is put it in there, and you could go about, again, you could measure, mark it, and do all that. I kind of like feeling it with my finger and making sure, because I can feel that it's nice and tight and really against the welt cord. If you were to mark the line all the way around there, you could follow that, but I prefer not to. I actually like to have the welt foot into the cord. I like to feel it, and I can feel exactly where it is. And then I get started. And now as I go, I just take my time, keep this on the edge, and I can feel with my finger where it's going. I just kind of walk it too, and we'll go around, I'll show you. And this here particularly is difficult around corners. I want to make sure that my stitching is on the inside of the previous line. That's the only downfall about having to redo stuff, is your stitching actually. You have to make sure that your needle goes on the welt side of it. So if you had sewn it too close, you would have no room and you'd actually go over the welt. When you're going around the corners doing it this way, this is the hardest part, because it's very easy to jump over on top of the welt, and then you're on this side. Once you hit here, the welt cord is ruined. You got to pull it apart and redo it. We stitch right on our old thread, which we did. And the way to test it is we're going to bring this inside out. And then if you have to turn it, tighten it up a little bit, you can. So what you end up doing is you're going to pull this tight. And you want to make sure that you don't see any thread. You want it nice and tight. The old thread there. So I kind of don't like this corner here. If you look, which is always problem areas going over threads, because as you're going across it, sometimes you get scared and you don't want to go over the welt, but you can see the threads in there. So I'm just going to take and just tighten that up a little bit, just because I want to make sure it looks good. You don't want to be putting the seat together and then have to come back and take it apart just to tighten up a thread, because when you go to pull this really tight, that's when you're going to see an issue. So I'm just going to go through here and tighten it up. I'd rather do it now than have a problem. A lot of times when you get interior kits from like different seat manufacturers, you'll see around the corners or around any butt seams where it's doubled up and lapped, you'll see actually they went through it a couple times just like this too. So I'm just tightening it up a little bit, and I don't have to tighten it up much. I just want to go a 1/64 over there, right? So you can see here, we just literally went over the thickness of a thread. And we'll tighten it to see if it tightened it up at all. And now you can see there, pulling it tight, it's nice. We still got the old thread from before where I repair it, but that'll come right out. You can actually come through here, follow your original thread now. So because you did it, you sewed your welt cord together first and then sewed it to material, you have your under thread here. So we're actually just going to go through and just follow that right along, making sure that as long as our sides are lined up, we just stay right on top of that. And we know it's going to be nice and tight. And again, one of the big problems people have with doing welting is when you start going around a corner, you either push it or you pull it. As soon as you do that, you're going to put some puckers in it. So you want to just Keep going, let the material relax, do its own thing. And just make sure you're not forcing anything. All right, so now you can see we went through and we put this on here. This is kind of a good example to show you because it's very contrasting colors. This teal aqua is very contrasting against the black. So what we could do is we're going to test fit it onto the seat cover itself and see how it fits. I just want to trim the bottom of this first to make sure it fits in there nice. So a lot of times also if you see a pre-done kit, you'll see the welt will be trimmed around the corners to keep it from puckering as it goes around. So when we go, before we put this on the seat after we test fit it, we'll cut this right off. Some people like to leave the salvage on there. Some people like to take it off. With welts, I kind of like it as long as you're not going to see it through the panel. And with foam, you won't, because what happens is I could put this welt this way and the welt core is going to stick over that way, or I could put it this way and it's going to stick over the other way. So you have an option of doing it. So on the sides, I will not trim the welt cord, but on the corners, I will trim it. And I'll show you right now. Whenever you're trimming the salvage, you always want to be careful. You want to keep it like I would say a 16th to an 1/8 away from the thread. And as you're cutting it, you always got to pay attention to the bottom, because a common thing is people have their scissors shifted and you end up cutting one of the threads. If you tap one thread, it's going to unravel. And a lot of times you don't really need to cut that much of this off. I'm only cutting this off because our pattern is kind of tight for where we foamed it. And since it's an aftermarket custom job, I don't want it to pucker up. And again, this is not a high-end seat, because I know we'll get a lot of people saying comments about how foaming and stuff like that. If you want to see some of our high-end stuff, you can. But honestly, we do a lot more of these for local people that just want a nice looking vehicle, nice looking interior. So now by trimming that, I don't know if you can see that, this actually sits really nice inside our bolster. So I'm just going to turn this inside out. So now I can put this on here. I know it's not glued in here, but I could tell that we're going to be able to put this together and it's going to fit really nice. So now I'm just going to go and sew the back of this on. We're going to actually glue this one down, just because, again, if it was a higher end job, we could put listing wires in there and hog ring it together. We could do Velcro in there and all that, but there are some tips and tricks you could do to have a nice looking seat without having to do all the extra work and spend that money for some of our local customers. So now you can see the the welt that we actually made from scratch here in this aqua teal color against the black. It's very vibrant. It really pops a lot. It should look great in the car. This little Rambler that our customers are building is 100% this color. So it's really gonna kind of pop and showcase the outside color onto the interior. But hopefully this actually helped you with learning how to make a welting, what the difference is with the welting. And we will be doing videos of piping, so people that always call welting piping will see the difference. And we hope you remember to like, share, subscribe, follow, ring the bell, and watch some more videos. Thanks.